Hi, Representative. Wonderful to have you with us here in Bled. Not surprisingly, we're going to start this conversation with Ukraine. You have, of course, built a very strong reputation as a strong voice on Ukraine, and your unwavering support for Ukraine has actually earned you a spot on the Kremlin's wanted list. 3.5 years into this war, you speak to your counterparts, you speak to 27 EU foreign ministers. 3.5 years into it, do you see signs of war fatigue among EU member states?
Of course I see signs of war fatigue amongst our public, and this is very, very understandable. At the same time, we don't have war, so why are we tired of the war as we are not fighting the bombs every day? But I see absolute resolve amongst the European countries still. Also European leaders being together with President Zelensky in the White House and really delivering the messages, reading Putin and his actions the way they're presented. So even if we are over 3 years into this war, then our unity still stands.
Yeah, you were just attending a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Copenhagen, and you're saying the resounding feedback that you're getting is we are still very firmly behind Ukraine 3.5 years into this war.
No, this is true, and this is reflected by our actions as well. I mean, we are working on the 19th package of sanctions regarding what more can we do to pressure Russia, because everybody understands that this is the only thing that Putin really takes seriously. Why he wanted to have this meeting in Alaska was to really postpone the sanctions threat that was coming from United States. So he really doesn't want the sanctions. And if we look the effects on Russian economy, we see that the sanctions really work. Yes, of course, we need to do more because the war is still going on, but the economy is not doing well.
Yeah, interestingly enough, you say amongst the deciders, amongst the politicians, amongst the leaders, you don't detect a war fatigue, perhaps amongst the European public a bit. Interestingly enough, there's a very recent Golob poll, which you, I'm sure, are very familiar with, which states that 69% of Ukrainians want a negotiated end to the war as soon as possible, as opposed to 24% who want to continue fighting until victory. So war fatigue is not just a European issue. Clearly, it's also very relevant and pertinent amongst the Ukrainian public.
I mean, this is, they are living under bombs every day. 3.5 years under bombs. You want this to stop. Recently I read a book by Erik Larson, The Splendid and the Vile. It's about Churchill and his family under the bombardment of Nazis and the London bombardment. And also the parallels that we have today with this is really, very much the parallels are there. And it is showing very well how people, of course, you can't sleep. Your friends are getting killed. Every family is affected. Everything. Of course, you're tired. You want this war to stop, and of course, Europeans want this war to stop as well. But what we want is that this is stopped for good, not that there's a pause, so that Russia can gather itself and then move on a larger scale, like we did, or like we saw with the Minsk agreements. And then the attacks that came later on. So that is what we want. And I didn't say that there is no fatigue amongst the leaders. There is still, they are all democratically elected leaders. And of course, democratically elected leaders are bound to the public's opinion as well, and very much tied to what the public is feeling.
Of course, they have to take the temperature at the end of the day of what the public wants. Interestingly enough, coinciding with these numbers I've just shared, there are diplomatic efforts now underway, very much led by Washington, very much led by the US President Donald Trump. How do you evaluate Donald Trump's diplomatic efforts up until now?
Everybody welcomes the diplomatic efforts made by President Trump. It's just the problem is that Putin is mocking those attempts. Everybody else is welcoming because the Europeans want peace, Ukrainians want peace, and Americans want peace. Who doesn't want peace is Putin. So it takes at least two to want peace. It only takes one to want war. And as long as Russia still wants war, there's no peace.
Yeah, it's very clear that U.S. President Trump is not pursuing first and foremost ceasefire. Instead, he's trying to push Ukrainians to give up territories as part of a future peace deal. That's something you called a trap that we as Europeans should not fall into. What exactly did you mean?
This is the classical Russian negotiation tactic. So, like pushing this, presenting demands, threats, using force for something that has never been yours. And by the way, in these negotiations, they are also demanding territories that they haven't even conquered militarily. So, like, we are making a compromise as we are settling for those territories that we have militarily conquered. So why is it a trap? It is because everybody is starting to talk about what Ukraine should give up. And saying, of course, it's up to Zelensky to decide what territories they are willing to give up. But then, you know, it really misses the point that Russia hasn't made any concessions, and they are the aggressor here. So they haven't made any concessions while everybody's talking about what Ukraine should give away, and that's a trap.
Would you want the U.S. president to be tougher on Vladimir Putin?
If we would all be tougher on Putin, then this war would be over.
But specifically the President of the United States, because at the end of the day, he is, whether we like it or not, he's currently leading those negotiations. He's pursuing his plan.
Well, we have heard that President Trump is not a very patient man. He seems to be very patient with Putin, though. So, yes, I think if we all would do more, then we could deprive Russia of the funds to wage this war. That's why we are trying to find new ways of really what could we sanction so that they can't, you know, circumvent. And I welcome also the decision by United States on the secondary sanctions, which is, you know, helping Russia to gain from the profits of oil. Selling over the oil price gap.
High Representative, am I mistaken when I say that Europe clearly is the largest contributor to Ukraine, but when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to looking for an end to this war, it seems to be playing a rather secondary role. Europe is not setting the agenda here, let's be clear.
No, it's not true. I mean, any deal has to have approval of Ukrainians as well as Europeans, because any deal has to be implemented by Europeans, so or Ukrainians. So if we are not part, so that this deal would just not work. Yes, like you know, we are not directly negotiating with Putin because we saw it already before that doesn't bring much result, because the pressure hasn't put Putin in a place where he actually wants peace. So we see that and we work on that track. And if there comes a moment where actually Russia is in that position that they also want peace, like really want peace, not only in words but also in deeds, what we don't see, then we can also discuss those points.
But if I understand you correctly, you're saying there cannot be a peace solution without the contribution, or rather involvement, of the Europeans. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just try to think about this in practical terms, not in theory, but in practical terms. So there is something agreed on whatever level, and then, you know, but the things are happening in Europe. So this war is in Ukraine, and all these security issues are concerning Europe. So how would that really work in practice? If, there is a deal that, for example, I'm just playing with the thought. So if Americans agree with Russia on anything, but then Europeans and Ukrainians say that, okay, that's fine, but we still keep supporting Ukraine so that they can defend themselves. So how does that work?
Now, let's see if the U.S. president sees it the same way. At the end of the day, there was this famous, or by now perhaps infamous, photo in the Oval Office of key European leaders sitting around the desk, listening to the U.S. president. Some described it as sitting like school kids. It's bad optics, isn't it?
Well, yes, we are living in times of optics, aren't we? But I think what is important is that those leaders also or President Trump has an ear for those leaders. And if he has an ear for those leaders, they can also, deliver all these messages. What they did also in Washington. So even if the pictures look like this, I think the outcome was very clear.
Yeah, you have called repeatedly for robust and credible security guarantees, of course, for Ukrainians. Interestingly enough, Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen says the EU has a very precise plan to send troops post-conflict to Ukraine with the backing of the United States.
When we talk about European Union, then we have to separate two things. One is the member states that are really deciding who sends troops. Member states, it's not the European Union competence. Everybody agrees or decides on their troops. But the European level issue, what we can bring to the security guarantees is that we have a military mission training now over 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And as we have said, the strongest security guarantee is a strong Ukrainian army. Second, we have a civilian mission, which is helping the police and border guard and all of this. We can expand those mandates so that they can help Ukraine more. And the third is the support to Ukraine defense industry. So these are the European Union level issues, what we can bring to the security guarantees and what we have also emphasized. But when it comes to troops, then all the member states are deciding themselves. And of course, these discussions are ongoing in the coalition of the willing. Yeah,
there seems to be positive signs coming from Washington that the U.S. will be involved in some form of security guarantees. But the U.S. president is known to have changed the stance once or twice.
That's true, but this is the room where we operate. So we hope that this stays, and the discussions are actually very practical. What does that really mean? What the Americans are saying, that Europeans should have a lion's share of the security guarantees. So it is a bit chicken and egg issue when we have the discussions. For example, on Friday we had with defense ministers of Europe, and some are saying that we are only coming if there is American backstop, but the Americans are saying that we are coming if you are providing the main. So we have to get everything ready on the decision making level so that we are ready if those security guarantees are really needed. But I want to emphasize that we are not there because Putin clearly does not want peace. Yeah,
and speaking of Putin, there was talks that there may be direct talks between President Zelensky and President Putin with attendance of the U.S. president. Those talks seem to be off for the time being. Rather unlikely, isn't it?
Well, President Zelensky agreed to this already like seven or more months ago, but since then Putin is just playing games. So he's definitely just mocking the peace efforts. And that's why we don't also see practically any signs that they are preparing for peace. Rather, the opposite. They are preparing for more war. We have winter coming. We see that they are preparing attacks on civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, to cause as much pain as possible. And that's why we need to prepare as well.
You've already mentioned that Europe is preparing for its 19th sanctions package. But Of course, it must be approved unanimously by EU countries. Hungary might be proving a stumbling block, as it has in previous years. And you also talked in Copenhagen about granting Ukraine billions of euros of aid from frozen Russian assets, also something that the Hungarians are not looking warmly upon. How are you going to break the Hungarian blockade here?
Well, first, we have 18 packages of sanctions where Hungarians are also on board, so we should not forget that. Of course, every time is hard. It's very hard discussions. It's getting harder all the time. I don't deny that. But they're still on board. When it comes to the frozen assets, then we had a very frank and open discussion with the ministers. And there are legal issues, there are worries for those countries who have a large share of those issues. So I think what is important right now is to really think about the exit strategy. Because again, if there is any kind of peace agreement in place, then we can't possibly imagine, and we have a European Council decision saying that those assets cannot be returned unless Russia pays compensation for the damages. So we need to work on the day after and the exit strategy, because we can't possibly imagine that all these damages that Russia is causing by bombing Ukraine will be paid by our taxpayers. It should be Russia who pays.
Moving forward and looking forward, High Representative, is there a clear EU position on what a politically acceptable end to the war in Ukraine looks like? Or are you essentially outsourcing this decision to Kiev and Washington?
Well, Kiev is under attack. Europe is not. So it is up to them to say. And otherwise, we would be also in this position where we are actually talking for Ukraine. But I think in every war, we have to have a strategy, and that strategy has to be, really that Ukraine wins this war. Otherwise, you don't always win wars, but you never win them if you don't set victory as a goal.
If U.S. President Donald Trump does get a peace deal, would you favor nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize?
Fortunately, I'm not the one who is making those applications. So.
You can nominate. Everybody's free to nominate.
I understand there are plenty of people who have done that already, so fine.
Well, but from what I'm gathering, peace is still far away off from what I'm gathering from your remarks.
Well, it's not only remarks. Look at the news. So
the reality on the ground.
The reality that Putin is not preparing for peace, but for more war.
Yeah. Let's turn towards the Middle East, if we may, where the humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate. By the way, we're going to have a very high-level panel on Ukraine later on, right after this, that takes a deep dive. But the EU was very quick, and you've pointed it out also here on stage. The EU was very quick and unified in condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But there's some critics who say that the EU has not demonstrated the same unity or clarity in Gaza and accuses the EU of double standards. Is that an accusation? Is that a criticism that you perceive to be fair?
Well, this is true that we haven't been united on the Middle East and on Gaza. This is, huge frustration that we have not been able. And why? Because we have 27 member states, and when it's regarding Ukraine, we have a common position, whereas regarding what is happening in the Middle East, we have countries, different reasons, some historical reasons, some other reasons, and I'm pushing all the time very hard, because I also feel that it's credibility of the European Union, that it's at stake, that we have to be, unified in this response. But what I don't agree is that we haven't been active. I think if you look globally, we are the most active on that file. We are constantly pressuring Israel. We are the biggest givers of humanitarian aid. We are the biggest supporters of Palestinian Authority. 1.6 billion billion euros we are giving to Palestinian Authority from 2025 to 27, so next 2 years. We are the ones keeping the two-state solution alive, and many member states are doing very good work on this. So there are positions where we are unified. First, immediate ceasefire and release of all hostages. Second, humanitarian aid must not be politicized, has to reach people. That's why we have worked on the humanitarian aid, understanding how many trucks could go in and how many border crossings open. And it is true that there is improvement, but I also agree that it's not enough. And it's super frustrating for me that we can't really deliver decisions here really to react, because we don't have a common position. We even don't have a qualified majority on the proposals that we have made. And, you know, personally, of course, I'm hearing all these things. I mean, coming here, you also hear the protests and everything. This is not easy, because I share the frustration that we are doing as much as we can, but it's not enough, because this humanitarian catastrophe is still ongoing. So I continue to work with the member states to have a common position, but so far it has been no
unified position here. Clearly no cohesive position on the part of the EU when it comes to Gaza and Israel. Do you feel, like some do, that the EU, because of its ambiguous stance here, has lost the moral credibility, that it has been damaged, that when you as a High Representative go to other countries and try to tell them about values, about human rights, that perhaps the EU position is no longer taken serious?
No, this is not true. I mean, usually when I go to these international fora, and I know this Gaza thing always comes up. So what I do before I go, I take out the numbers. For example, I was in ASEAN. So going to ASEAN, you know, all the ASEAN members and very big countries in terms of population, some richer, some less rich, but a lot of people at least there. So I know that this accusation comes.
Yeah.
So what I do, I take the numbers of the humanitarian aid, of the support for Palestinian Authority, and then compare them. And for example, when I say that humanitarian aid, we have been given over 500 million euros, 1.6 billion to Palestinian Authority to keep the Palestinian state alive and two-state solution, and ASEAN at the same time 40 million for the whole of ASEAN. So I always say this, that if you accuse us of double standards, you should also put your money where your mouth is, because we are really, really trying. And I'm not using this as an excuse. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do more. Yes, we should, because the situation is catastrophic. But it is just that we are also, I don't take this accusation that we are inactive, that we don't care, that we don't do anything.
Yeah. Your predecessor, Josep Borrell, has accused, though, the EU institutions of inaction over Gaza, and he has accused Israel of committing genocide. Your predecessor, Josep Borrell. Is that a terminology that you would subscribe to?
Over the summer, and actually quite long time, to improve the situation on the ground. That was the agreement with the foreign ministers, where everybody agrees that we have to help the people on the ground with humanitarian aid, so that there wouldn't be famine, so that people would get help and everything. That requires me to talk to the Israelis. And that's why I have to talk to both sides. I talk to the Palestinians, I talk to the Israelis, and I do this with the mandate of 27 member states.
What are the Israelis telling you?
Well, with the humanitarian understanding, we reached a point where compared to some months ago, there is more trucks getting in. There are more border crossings open than before. They have repaired the electricity and water pipelines.
But there seems to be no visible improvement on the ground.
Yes,
really.
yes, it is not enough. That I'm telling you, it's not enough. But we have still achieved something. I agree, it's not enough, but it's something. So without really talking to them all the time, without pressuring, for example, the international NGOs, I mean, they wanted to have, this 9 of September, basically, all those kicked out. So we managed to call this off. And with the Israeli government, it's extremely, extremely difficult. And my frustration comes also from the fact that we are not successful enough. But are we then more successful if we don't talk to them, considering that Israelis' relation with the American administration is totally different, and Americans have the leverage over what Israel does or doesn't more than us. So we try to help on the humanitarian track.
Yeah,
and I agree with you, it's not enough.
Yeah, and you certainly pointed out that there is a lack of cohesion when it comes to the position, European position in Gaza. You made that very clear. A group of 8 EU countries, led by France and including our host country here today, Slovenia, of course, have said that they will formally recognize a Palestinian state at the upcoming UN General Assembly this month. What do you make? What do you think of the current momentum to recognize Palestine? Are you in favor of that?
It is up to the member states to decide. It's their decision, because the European Union is not recognizing anybody.
The U.S. High Representative support that.
But my question is, that doesn't mean, that doesn't matter really what I think or don't think, because it doesn't
you're the
change.
EU High Representative.
But that's why I'm representing 27, also those who don't recognize Palestine. And that is the difficulty of my position here. So what I'm just, again, keeping in mind, will it stop the killing? Yeah. Probably not, but it will keep the two-state solution alive. Again, Europe is the stronger supporter, and everybody is on board for the two-state solution. So in order to have two states, you need to have a Palestinian state that is stronger and equal to have this level.
Just 2 quick questions before we move on. There's obviously an international warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu's arrest by the ICC. In your opinion, as the EU High Representative, but also Vice President of the European Commission, should EU heads of state continue to meet and receive Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yeah, again, it's up to them to decide, but they should keep to the international arrangements and agreements that they are subject to. So if international law is it like it is, so that gives you the question, the answer.
Yeah, but certainly your frustration that you have shared with us very transparently is very felt. You mentioned that Israel, of course, has a very different relationship with the United States, and that brings me in the remaining time also to transatlantic ties, US-EU ties, very important, of course. How would you currently characterize the current state of EU-US relations under Donald Trump? The EU has agreed, obviously, to 15% tariffs on EU exports to the US, a deal that some critics have said give the impression of weakness and submission to Donald Trump. What do you make of this?
Well, United States is still our greatest ally in terms of, and also biggest trading partner. We have been very clear that we think that the trade wars, nobody benefits from the trade wars, really. We didn't want this, like all the rest of the Europe, not European, but also globally, the countries don't want the trade wars. I think eventually clients, customers, people will end up paying more. Which is not good. So definitely, our relationship with the Americans is in change because of the new administration. But we are still very strong allies. Have we always seen eye to eye in everything before? That's also not true. So what is important that we still stand for our interest as well.
And Europe, of course, in this context, still very much heavily depends on NATO and the US for hard security, of course. So that's a almost indispensable relationship for the time being, at least until the EU actually figures out how to put the terminology of strategic autonomy into reality.
Working on that. If you think about all the initiatives and really the boost and the additional funds that come into also boosting European defense industry so that we would be more independent. And there's a lot of work done. And by the way, again, you know, the book that I referred previously, what was interesting was also how the Brits were building up or boosting their airplane industry during this time when they were bombing. So there was Lord Beaverbrook, who was Minister of Airplane Production. And really, and I was reading this and thinking that, if they managed to do that during, being under bombardment and everything, and as Ukrainians are managing to do this, drone production and everything under bombardment, then we can also do it on the European level. So even in this book, there was a description how the Germans were really surprised that they should surrender now. How come they still have airplanes and they should surrender? They didn't. I think, again, the parallel is when it comes to Ukraine is that, Russians are also quite surprised that they should already surrender, but they are not.
We are, of course, in Slovenia here today. The very first panel of the day focused on the Western Balkans and EU enlargement. Specifically, High Representative, you wrote yourself, quote, "The Western Balkans is of strategic importance to the EU. Enlargement to this region is our most significant geopolitical project, and it is also a personal priority for me."
Yes.
You feel strongly about it, about EU
very
enlargement?
Strongly, and I must say also that Commissioner Marta Costa is doing a great job. Is really dedicated, and I think we are a good team in this. And I really do believe that with this hard work, we can show results in this 5 years that we are in office. That we can move with the enlargement, so that actually, we put also the enlargement in action.
Yeah, the preceding panel here spoke about the possibility, perhaps, that within the next couple of years, Montenegro and Albania becoming full-fledged EU members. Is that something you would support?
Yes, they are quite far, and as it is a merit-based process, then we really need to move on. And also all the worries that we have on the European side, I always try to bring the examples that actually it's also in our interest that the Western Balkans are with us, but also in terms of prosperity. I bring this example. When Estonia, 4 years before we joined the European Union, our GDP per capita was 36% of the European average. When we joined, then it was 48% of the European average, and now it is close to 90% of the European average, which means that, the tide lifts all the boats, and together, actually, we are much stronger. We need to work on that internal market, because that is also giving us economic power that raises our geopolitical influence.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I do want to get in the EU relations with the Global South, for lack of a better term. When we talk about the Global South, obviously we're talking about 3.5 billion people. That's 45% of the global population and 30% of the world economy. We just had a very momentous, very interesting meeting in China, where China came together with India, saying we're no longer rivals, we're partners. Vladimir Putin, of course, was there. Lukashenko from Belarus was there. The party that wasn't there was Europe and the Western world. Aren't we invited?
Well, not to that party, but we are invited to a lot of other parties, including with those partners.
Well, that's a pretty important party.
But no, it is. For example, India, is also looking for a way to diversify its trade portfolio. We have, 73 countries that really we are working with having trade agreements. Because what this trade war globally brought about was that everybody were looking for, partners to diversify. And we are the credible and reliable partner for most of the countries. We might be boring, we might be, it takes time when we take decisions, but when we take those decisions, we are not running European Union by executive orders, which means that those decisions stay in place, and we are a reliable partner.
The reason why I ask this, of course, and that's my last question before we wrap it up here, is because those very important, very powerful nations are creating facts there in China. They're coming together. They're building alliances without a Western presence. The Europe's role and influence in a multipolar world.
But again, you know, we are also building alliances, and we are there, you know, in different fora. And I've said to the foreign ministers as well, European foreign ministers, that we need to be in all those big fora where actually we need to combat also the narratives that are against European Union.
But we so often do not speak with a unified voice internationally. You said it yourself.
Well, on most of the issues we actually do speak on a unified voice, but some very big issues we don't have a unified voice. But that doesn't change the fact that actually we are a very big economic player, and countries are still want to engage with us. And also when it comes to security and defense, yes, we are not the traditional security provider, but still, again, the countries are interested in diversifying their portfolio with a partner like European Union that is trustworthy.
So you're a firm believer that the EU is still capable of shaping the international order and not just being merely a bystander?
Yes.
Yeah, so very clear. High Representative and the Vice President of the European Commission, I thank you for this frank discussion. Let's hope on Ukraine, on Gaza, that better times are ahead. This is your applause. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, ladies and gentlemen,
ready is not even ready. So I would put to you that we're now facing a big challenge, that there's talk of some kind of peace, but actually whatever vehicle is sitting in the garage, a prototype for peace, there isn't even a door, there isn't even a key to open the door at the moment, and that's what we want to try and define in these in the next hour before 5:30. So let me invite, we have 7 guests, all of whom have deep experience in Russia and also in Ukraine and also more broadly as well on issues. I would put to you that there is one thing in war theory about you only really get peace, as we've seen with the Dayton Agreement in 1995 here. You only get peace when there's weariness among all the parties. And at the moment, I'd put to you that is not the case. Let me now invite